essentially satisfaction survey. The original survey we launched in 2021 to gauge kind of the community sentiment about a number of essentially town services, sentiments around some capital projects, other just general perceptions of the community. And so in this year's budget, council desired to have an updated survey to see what's changed, solicit some input from the community, or at least some perceptions of the community on some other issues. And tonight is about providing a report on those results. So I believe Jason's online. I'm going to turn it over to him.
Yep, I'm here. Thanks, Liam. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes. Welcome, Jason.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let me share my screen here. All right. Well, thanks. My name is Jason Morado. I'm with ETC Institute, and we're a market research firm that specializes in conducting community surveys for local governments. And we just finished for the second time conducting a community survey for the town of Scarborough. So today I'm going to walk through the key findings from the survey, and then we'll go through any questions or comments anyone has as well. Before we get started, I have just one slide about ETC Institute. We're based in the Kansas City area. We're a national leader in providing market research for local governments. We've been doing this type of work for over 40 years. And in the last 10 years alone, we've conducted surveys in more than 1,000 communities across the country. So this is the type of work that we specialize in. This is just a quick overview of what I'll go through today. I'll go over the purpose and methodology of the survey. I'll walk through our key findings from the survey, a summary of our main takeaways, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions as well. So there are several reasons to conduct a survey like this. One is to get an objective assessment of how satisfied residents are with major town services, and also to determine what residents feel are the top priorities for the community. We're also able to measure trends from your previous survey. This is the second time we've conducted your survey. The first time was about the same time of year 2 years ago. And most of the questions were the same so that we can measure trends over time. But we did make a few updates to the survey as well, which is the pretty standard process for these types of surveys, where most questions stay the same, so you can measure trends over time. But each time you conduct the survey, you make a few updates as needed. And then we're also able to compare your results with other communities across the country. So this survey was administered by a combination of mail and online to randomly selected residents throughout the town. We received a total of 608 completed surveys. Our goal was to receive at least 600, so we accomplished that. And the results of these 608 surveys at the 95% level of confidence has a margin of error of plus or minus 4%. Essentially, that means that if we conducted the survey the same way 100 times, 95 times the result would be plus or minus 4% from what we're reporting. So the results are not perfect even for a statistically valid survey, but the margin of error is small. So here we have a map of Scarborough. The red dots are households that completed the survey. So we had a good distribution throughout the town. And this is a similar distribution as we had on your last survey a couple of years ago. As we were administering the survey, we also monitored the demographics of survey respondents to ensure that the demographics of the survey reflect the actual population of the town. So we especially paid close attention to key demographic areas such as age, race, ethnicity, and gender. So here's what we learned from the survey. We found that residents have a very positive perception of the town of Scarborough. Over 3/4 of respondents are satisfied with the overall quality of life in Scarborough. We also found, just like we did in 2021, that satisfaction with town services is much higher in Scarborough than it is in other communities. You rated above the U.S. average in 42 out of the 51 areas that we compared. And in most cases, your ratings were significantly higher. We'll look at this in more detail in a little bit, but I do want to point out a couple of areas that especially stood out. One is that satisfaction with the overall quality of town services, rated 18 percentage points above the US average. And that's probably the most important question on the survey, because here we're asking residents to take into account all the services that you're providing and really giving an overall satisfaction rating for how well you're doing. The other area that really stood out was customer service from town employees. That's the area where you rated the farthest above the US average. And there you rated 49 percentage points above the US average when it comes to customer service provided by town employees. The top overall priorities for town services are traffic flow and the ease of getting around town, maintaining streets, sidewalks, and infrastructure, and communicating with the public. And we also asked residents what are the top issues facing Scarborough over the next 5 years. And the top issues are the pace of growth and expansion, the affordability of town services, affordable housing, and public education. So first, we'll look at some general perceptions that residents have in Scarborough. We asked residents to rate their perceptions of the town in a number of different ways. The dark blue are those who gave ratings of very satisfied. The light blue is satisfied. The gray is neutral. And we interpret neutral as average or meeting expectations. Neutral is a rating of a 3 on a 5-point scale. So it's not a bad rating, but it's not as positive as the blue, which are the satisfied and very satisfied. And then the pink and red are those who are dissatisfied or very dissatisfied. So if you look at the top of this chart, most respondents feel safe in Scarborough. Most gave very high ratings to the overall quality of life, as well as the appearance of the town. If you look at this fourth row, 67% of respondents are satisfied with the overall quality of town services. And that's compared to only 7% who are dissatisfied. So you've got almost a 10-to-1 ratio of those who gave positive responses versus negative to the overall quality of town services. And again, that's one of the most important questions on the survey. So that's a very, very good ratio. Now, if you look at the bottom of the chart, the areas that residents are the most dissatisfied with are affordable housing. And that's a trend we've seen all over the country, especially over the past year or two. And then how well the town managing growth. This was the very first question on the survey. Here we asked residents to rate major categories of town services. So for this question, we're asking residents to rate these areas at the big picture departmental level. And then later on in the survey, we asked about some more specific areas within some of these categories. So again, the blue are the positive ratings. Those who are very satisfied are satisfied. The gray is neutral, and the pink are the negative ratings. So overall, the positive ratings far outweigh the negative. Over 80% of respondents are satisfied with public safety, customer service from town employees, public beaches and waterfront parks, and library services. The only two areas that had more dissatisfied residents than satisfied were traffic flow and public transportation. Now, we saw that overall residents are very satisfied with customer service from town employees. We also asked respondents about some specific aspects of interacting with town employees. The dark blue means residents always observed these behaviors. The light blue means they usually did. And you can see these results are very, very positive. If you look at the top of this chart, for example, 93% of respondents say that Scarborough employees are always or usually courteous and polite. Most respondents also say it was easy to find someone to address their request. Most feel the response time was reasonable. Most were satisfied with their experience. Almost 90% were able to get their question and concern resolved either usually or always. And then most respondents also said that Scarborough employees went the extra mile. So here we have a map of Scarborough, and we broke the results out by census block. So these are fairly small areas, and this tells us if residents in different parts of the town have different perceptions of the town or rate services differently. We create a map like this for every question on the survey, asked on a 5-point scale. So there's about 90 to 100 maps in the report. There's just a couple we'll take a look at here. This one is for the overall quality of town services, and you can see the entire map is blue. So this tells us that residents in all parts of Scarborough are satisfied with the overall quality of town services. Sometimes what happens is, even if the results are very positive overall, once you break it into these smaller geographic areas, you might see some areas where residents are not as satisfied or having some concerns with services. But here you can see that's not the case, that you're doing a great job providing services equally throughout the town. This map is for overall how safe residents feel in Scarborough. Again, you can see the entire map is blue, and in fact, there are a couple areas in dark blue, which is the highest possible rating. So this shows that residents throughout Scarborough feel safe. So I mentioned earlier that satisfaction with town services is much higher in Scarborough than it is in other communities. You rated above the US average in 52 or 42 out of the 51 areas that we compared, and you rate significantly higher, so in other words, more than 5% above the US average in 36 of those areas. You also rated above the Northeast regional average in 41 out of the 51 areas, and significantly higher in 33 of those areas. So for these next two charts, the dark blue line are Scarborough residents who are either very satisfied or satisfied. The gray bar are the satisfaction ratings for residents in the Northeast region, which includes the state of Maine as well as some surrounding states. And then the light blue are the satisfaction ratings for residents from all across the country. And this is based on a national survey that ETC Institute administers annually with about 10,000 randomly selected residents from all across the country. So this first chart is for major categories of town services. I put blue arrows by the places where you rate significantly above the US average, which you can see includes just about every category that we rated. The area where you rate it the farthest above the national average is customer service from town employees. Your satisfaction rating was nearly 89%, and you can see the national average is only 39%, so you're more than double the national average. Your ratings were also significantly higher than the US average when it comes to public safety, library services, solid waste, parks and recreation, public education, stormwater management, street sidewalks and infrastructure, which that was one of the lower rated items on your survey, but you can see still the ratings are much higher than the national average. You also rated much higher when it comes to communication with the public and enforcing codes and ordinances. The only two areas that rated lower, and this is consistent with your last survey as well, is traffic flow and public transportation. Here are comparisons specifically for public safety. In 9 out of these 11 areas, your ratings are significantly above the US average, and you can see that includes a variety of different types of services. The area where you rate the farthest above the US average is overall local police protection, where you had a nearly 92% satisfaction rating, and you can see the national average is only 53%. The two areas that didn't rate significantly above the national average are visibility of police at neighborhoods as well as retail areas. Now, the ratings weren't bad in those areas. They were still higher than the regional and national average, but they just weren't as much higher than some of these other categories. Here are comparisons for infrastructure. You can see that in 7 of these 10 areas, your ratings are significantly above the US average. The areas where you rate the farthest above the US average include maintaining public buildings and facilities, and just the overall cleanliness of streets and public areas. The areas where the ratings were more on par with other communities were street lighting, quality of sidewalks, and quality of bikeways. Again, not bad ratings, but they're just more on par with other communities and not significantly higher like a lot of these other categories. And then when it comes to trash and recycling services, your ratings are significantly higher than the US average when it comes to the overall quality of trash collection, as well as curbside recycling. Recycling services and drop-off center, the ratings weren't bad, but they were more on par with the regional average. They actually were quite a bit higher though than the national average. So we also compared these results to your previous survey. Overall, the satisfaction ratings this year are down a little bit from 2021, but that's a trend we've seen all over the country over the past year or so. So that's not a surprise. Also, your ratings were extremely high in 2021, so it's difficult for them to keep increasing when they're so high to begin with. But overall, here are the top of this chart are the areas with the biggest increases in satisfaction since 2021. That included the quality of neighborhood streets, curbside recycling, solid waste services, and then adult programs and services related to the library. The biggest decreases in satisfaction were traffic flow and ease of getting around town, overall image of town, quality of service from dispatch, and then traffic signaling system. So now we'll take a look at the top overall priorities. So we saw earlier how satisfied residents are with major categories of city services. As a follow-up question to that, we asked which of these services should receive the most emphasis from town leaders over the next 2 years. So you can see the top priority is traffic flow. Almost 2/3 of respondents selected that as one of the 3 most important services for the town to emphasize. The other highest priorities were maintaining street sidewalks and infrastructure, public education, and then the effectiveness of communication with the public. So this leads to what we call the important satisfaction analysis. You might remember this from a couple of years ago. This analysis is based on 2 different types of data. First, we asked residents how satisfied they are with town services. Then we asked which services should receive the most emphasis from town leaders over the next couple of years. So the idea behind this is that those areas that have a combination of low satisfaction ratings, but at the same time are rated as the most important, should be the highest priorities focused on. So this first table is for major categories of town services. You can see that highest priority, which is in pink, is traffic flow, which is consistent with your last survey. So that's the number 1 priority. In yellow, we have other high priorities, which include maintaining street sidewalks and infrastructure, effectiveness of communication with the community, and public transportation. This is the important satisfaction analysis specifically for infrastructure. You can see the top overall priority is the quantity of sidewalks. Other high priorities include the quantity of bikeways, the adequacy of street lighting, and the quality of sidewalks. And this table is based specifically on public safety services. Overall, the satisfaction ratings were very high for public safety, pretty much across the board. So you don't see as many items in yellow or pink as being a high or a very high priority. But the highest priority is visibility of police in neighborhoods, enforcing traffic laws, and the visibility of police in retail areas are the second and third highest priorities overall, and they just missed being in that yellow high priority category. And then we asked respondents, what are the 3 most significant issues you think Scarborough will face over the next 5 years? You can see the 2 issues that really stand out as the highest priorities are the pace of growth and affordability of town services. And then the 3rd and 4th highest priorities are affordable housing and public education. So we've got a few other findings to take a look at. Here we ask residents how they feel about the current pace of growth and development in different areas. So the yellow means that residents feel the pace of growth is too slow in those areas. The gray means they think the pace of growth is just right in those areas. And then the dark red means they feel the pace of growth is too fast in those areas. And these results are similar to what we saw a couple of years ago. If you look at the top of this chart, you can see over 70% of residents feel the pace of growth for both single family and multifamily residential development is too fast. Almost half, which is the top choice, feel the pace of growth is just right for retail and business development. And then 50% or more of respondents feel the pace of growth is too slow when it comes to income restricted affordable housing, workforce housing options, and then especially redevelopment of abandoned or underutilized properties. This was a new question on the survey this year. We asked residents to rate their level of concern for various issues related to increased residential growth. The dark blue means respondents are very concerned. The light blue is concerned. The gray means they're somewhat concerned. And then the pink and red means they're not concerned or not at all concerned. So the areas that the highest percentage of respondents are concerned with are increased when it comes to residential growth, are increased municipal budget and property taxes, increased student enrollment in the school district, and increased travel or commute times. And then we asked respondents what are their primary sources of information about town issues, services, and events. So the top sources of information are the newspaper, Scarborough Leader, the town's website, Facebook, and then email subscription to the newsletter. As a follow-up question, we asked which of these sources of information are your most preferred methods of seeing and receiving information from the town. And you can see that the top 4 preferred sources of information align with the way residents are currently getting information, which means residents are able to get the information in the way that they most prefer. So just a quick recap, we saw that residents have a very positive perception of Scarborough. Nearly 80% of respondents are satisfied with the overall quality of life. We also found that satisfaction with town services is much higher in Scarborough than other communities. You rate higher than the national average at 42 out of 51 areas. We saw there were a lot of areas where you rate significantly higher than the US average, but a couple that really stood out were the overall quality of town services and then customer service from town employees. The top overall priorities for town services are traffic flow, maintaining street sidewalks and infrastructure, and then communicating with the community. And then the top issues that residents feel are facing Scarborough over the next 5 years are the pace of growth, affordability of town services, affordable housing, and public education. So that is everything I had. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Let's stop sharing here.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Does anyone want to start with questions or comments for Jason? Yes, Jean Marie.
Hi, Jason, Jean Marie Katerina. Thank you very much for this report. I appreciate all the work you guys have done. I know there's some confusion out in the community regarding the results of this survey, i.e. the statistically significant survey versus the self-selected survey that we allowed people to complete after this one was finished. Could you speak to that? Just because most people don't understand statistics, number one, and why we do what we do as far as the so-called statistically significant surveys?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so statistically valid means that the results represent a much larger sample. In other words, the entire town, even though it seems like a relatively small sample. And there are 2 things that have to happen in order for results to be considered statistically valid. One is that households are selected at random to receive the survey. So every household in the town had an equal chance of being selected at random to receive a survey. And then 2 is that the demographics of survey respondents need to reflect the actual population of the town. So that's why when we're administering the statistically valid survey, we're monitoring those key demographic areas such as age, race, ethnicity, gender, geographic location. Now, in addition to that, we also open the survey up for anyone to fill out. Now, for that, we don't have control over who fills it out, so we're not monitoring demographics or geographic location. We call that the general public survey, and that's available for anyone. Now, the results we went through today were based just on the statistically valid survey, but we also just finished collecting data for the general public survey, and we'll provide those results separately at a later time.
Can I have 2 follow-up? And Jason, if I'm recalling correctly, the last survey, they were both fairly close. Am I remembering that correctly, or are you not prepared to answer that?
I have to go back and double check.
Okay,
I mean,
that's fine.
typically, Yeah, typically the priorities are similar, but satisfaction ratings can vary between the two. So,
Okay.
yeah,
Thank you.
sure.
Councilor Cushing.
Yes, Jason, there was a statement at the beginning of the executive summary that I think confused some people. And it talked about your cross-checking addresses against, I think, the people who were mailed the survey and then people who took the survey online. And frankly, I found it a little confusing, and I think it gave some people the impression that we might have been discarding people's surveys and perhaps in the most cynical interpretation, not interested in hearing from some folks. And I know that's incorrect, but I'd like you perhaps to explain that and reassure us how you reconciled the mailed surveys for the statistically valid sample against the online survey.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we certainly didn't discard or not count any completed surveys. Now, our goal for the statistically valid survey was to receive at least 600 completed surveys. The typical response rate for a survey of this length is around 12 to 15%. So in order to reach that goal of 600, it means we mailed surveys to about 4,000 randomly selected households. So that's the random sample. Now the mailed survey has the address printed on it. So if someone shows to fill out the mailed survey and mail it back to us, then we know the address because it's printed in the survey. Now, if someone chooses to take the survey online, they have to provide their home address when they submit the survey. And that's how we determine whether that survey is part of the random sample or part of the general public, which is outside of the random sample. But the survey is still counted. It's just a matter of which database is it in. Is it in the database for the statistically valid survey, which is the results we went through today, or the database for the general public results, which we're still processing that data.
So what would happen if I got a mailed survey and then I really wanted to make sure you heard me, so I filled it out online?
And then also by mail, you mean, or by online only?
Online. In other words, I got one in the mail. I filled it out.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't feel like I needed to go and do an online survey, but it seems like I could have. What would have happened in that instance?
Well, then you count as part of the statistically valid survey. If you're one of those households selected at random to receive the survey, you're part of the random sample. And whether you fill out the
Gotcha.
survey through the mail or online, your results were included as part of the statistically valid survey.
Gotcha. So you're not going to double count me, is the point.
Yeah, we don't double count. Exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
we don't usually.
Well,
Yeah.
okay. Well, I'm sorry to press it, but that really wasn't clear to some people. And I got a little mail about it. So I thought
Right.
for the purpose of clarity, we should explain it. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions for Jason while he's here?
I have a question.
Yes, April.
Hi, Jason. If I'm remembering, sorry, my voice sounds terrible. If I'm remembering correctly, there was a dashboard that we had for the 2021 survey that we had linked to on our webpage that allowed users to manipulate the data or select certain portions of the data and pull it out and look at it. Is that service something that we're going to be able to have with this more updated survey?
It is. Yes, we're still working on that. That always takes a little extra time to complete. But what we'll do is we'll add this data to what we had before. So you'll be able to see the results for both surveys on that dashboard. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And that should be ready towards the end of the month.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Councilor Ham?
I don't have a question so much as I have a comment. As I read through this, number one, I felt very confident that what you've explained in terms of the process we followed was very well done and very consistent with what we had done before. So thank you for that. But what really struck me is when I looked at the areas of dissatisfaction, I know that we have a high level of satisfaction with services, but if you read through this, that seems to imply that people are concerned about the sustainability, our ability to continue to provide services that will be affordable and that will be available to people who, are maybe interested in, aging out in Scarborough, not having to move away or not having to do something in order to afford to stay in their homes. So I was really struck by that. I don't think we've moved the needle at all on that, over the past several years. And I read some of Councillor Cushing's remarks about communications, and I think that part of the level of dissatisfaction, I think, as I'm interpreting it, is that we have not been successful in managing growth as it relates to single family and multifamily residential development. We've not been successful with that. We, in fact, I think the frustration is people have a feeling that we have not gotten the message, that we've not changed our strategies or tactics in any way. So, I mean, this is an interpretation, obviously, but those things were troubling to me and suggest that we have a lot of work to do. I'm encouraged the timing of this as well, because it's really going to roll into what we're going to be doing later in the month of January. But I mean, that's a good example right there. People had to ask us questions about when we're going to do our goal setting and is it available to the public? People had to ask us that. That wasn't on our town website, and that wasn't in any of the vehicles that people tend to turn to get their information. The newspaper and the Scarborough Leader, and they go to the town website and they subscribe to the e-newsletter. So I think we need to take a very hard, and this is not a criticism of the efforts that we've taken, which have been enormous, to make sure we're communicating, thoroughly and in many different ways. But I think the feedback, as I interpret it, is people just don't feel that we're getting the message and doing anything about it.
So all counselors, I think for the sake of Jason's time while he's with us, let's keep him here for our questions. And then I think we can get into maybe some of our insights into some of what we've seen here after Jason kind of pops off.
Sorry, I jumped at you again.
That's right. Councilor Anderson.
So Jason, I have a question about the demographics. So at the beginning, you had mentioned age, race, and gender were really what you focused on in terms of, ensuring that it was, equivalent to the broader sample of the community. I'm just curious, for some of the other demographics, is there any bias in the results relative to the sample that you took too? What I was surprised to see, and it was in both years, so it was the same thing in both years, and I guess I just didn't notice it last time, was that 50% of respondents had lived in Scarborough for 20 plus years. And so is that, I should probably know this, but I don't know, like, of our residents, how many, is that 50% a normal number, or is there some response bias in the survey result that is geared to some demographics, so that as we look at this, we kind of know what that bias could potentially be?
Right. When we're looking at the US Census, it doesn't really have data on that, like the typical length of time residents have lived in the town. That number is a little higher than most other communities, although that's usually the biggest group is those who have lived in the town for a long time. One thing we could do is run a crosstab that breaks results out based on how long residents have lived in Scarborough and see if there are differences. And the dashboard should have that to some extent, but maybe kind of in a limited amount. But that would be something we could do. I think that would be maybe interesting to take a look at.
Well, I would just be interested if the town, like maybe Sedco or somebody who knows some of these things, could kind of help us compare, like, to know, is there any sort of bias in the demographics that took the survey? Not that they're invalid, but just for us to kind of have that context as we look at it, to know that, hey, what we're dealing with here is a bias that's geared towards higher income levels in Scarborough, or whatever it could be compared to our comparison points. Again, I'm just curious, because I know you have increase, decrease in the different results, but from a statistical perspective, is it as simple as saying anything 5% and above is considered a significant change? Because even though things changed between the years, just as we look at this, is it a statistically significant change, or is it just a little bit of a decline and a little bit of an increase?
In general, we consider anything more, the margin of error for the entire survey is 4%. So anything more than the margin of error of 4% is considered a significant change. Now, one thing you have to factor in a little bit is that residents had the option of selecting don't know if they didn't have an opinion on a service. Now we kept those out of these charts because for the most part, it's a very small percentage of residents who said don't know. But if there's something where a higher percentage said don't know, then the margin of error is a little bit greater. You know, for example, something like public transportation, which not as many residents just have an opinion about, just aren't as familiar with. But a good general rule is any change of more than 4% is considered a significant difference.
Okay.
I've
And
got a quick question. Are you all set over there, Counselor? Evans?
I have to find my other question. Go ahead.
So, the biggest thing that struck me here was the noticeable drop in the community perception categories as far as percentages of change from 2 years ago. So I saw it stacked up in here against what the Northeast region and the overall US were and where Scarborough fell on those as far as where our community perceived us to be. Do you have where the US and the Northeast region, have they trended up or down over that 2-year period? Like, so I noticed we dropped off over that time period. Did the rest of the region, did the rest of the US drop off as well? Are we kind of an anomaly within that?
That number's gone down across the country over the past couple of years. Yeah, so it's not just Scarborough. As you mentioned, you're still slightly above the regional and national average, so the numbers aren't bad. But they have gone down quite a bit since the last survey. But that has definitely been a national trend. It's probably gone down a little bit more here, but it's just across the board, satisfaction ratings have decreased over the past couple of years. Really just on just about everything.
Yeah, is there though a way to see that in a kind of almost like in a graph like this, like the rest of the nation moved down 2%, we've moved down 12. Is there something within your modeling that allows us to see those types of things as well?
Yeah, there would be. We could take, the best way would be to take a look at the last report because we had the same question then and see how the results came out at that time, which I don't remember offhand, but that would be in the 2021 report.
Councilor Anderson?
Yep. So one question I have for you again, just as we look at this. Last time we did the survey, I think in the statistically valid sample, we were able to get 800 responses. And in this one, we only got 600. And I know from a statistics perspective, that's what we needed to get the 95% confidence. But again, from a comparison perspective, is that something that we should be concerned about, that it was 200 less compared to what we had last time as we're doing that comparison? Or again, from a statistics perspective, is it safe to kind of look at the two side by side and really make the assumptions as we're looking at the 2 years? This is our first time doing the
Right.
2-year comparison, so that's why I'm kind of interested in looking at things from that lens.
Right. Yeah, from a statistics perspective, it doesn't make much of a difference. It's pretty typical when we conduct a survey in the community for the first time to have a much better response than we do in follow-up years. I actually gave a presentation last night for a city in Oregon, which had the exact same thing. Their goal was 400. Who did their survey for the first time years ago, they had over 600 completed surveys. And this time, I think it was barely over 400. Then we have another project presentation coming up soon where it's the same thing. So that's pretty normal that in follow-up surveys, some residents maybe feel like they just took the survey, even though it's been a couple of years, it's been a while, but you just kind of get some of that fatigue, I guess, to some extent over time. But that's why we have a guaranteed minimum number of completed surveys. So we make sure we hit that no matter what.
Okay.
Now, the margin of error is slightly greater this time than last time because of a different number of surveys, but it's by a small amount, by, less than 1%, even like 0.1%. So.
And then my last question, and then
Yeah, go ahead.
so, to Nick's point, the perception of the community was, again, a takeaway I had looking at it, like there were some significant drops in a lot of those categories. And I think Don's comment around growth and things, like, is there a way that you could do some sort of correlation between some of these significant decreases to help us understand, how much some of these things really were weighted in terms of the increase in dissatisfaction in certain areas or the decrease in you know, the image of the community? Is it growth? Is it traffic? Are those the two things? I mean, that's what I'm assuming, but from a data
Right.
perspective, can you help confirm that? Again, the other one that I was a little disappointed, but I'm not surprised, was the decline in quality of elected officials and leadership. And I think that has to do probably with growth in traffic and those questions, but
Yeah.
I'd like to know, is it just those things? Are there other things that we need to be also cognizant of? Is it communications? So that way we can really make sure that we're doing our part there to help improve that score. Because that's us. That's like, I view that as our approval rating. And I was disappointed to see it where it was.
Point of order, that's your approval rating.
Yeah.
The new guy here.
Right. Yeah, it's those, yeah, I mean, those are great questions. I think growth and traffic do have the biggest impact on that, but we can run some regression analysis, which would show what factors have the biggest impact on the overall image of town. So yeah, that is something we can do. Yep, we can do that.
I had one, this is a real question this time, not a comment, so, and excuse me if I'm confused on this, but was this, did we expect this survey was gonna give us sort of, direction on what we need to do with reference to, revisiting the school issue? This is totally different than that. So I would say that, good news, bad news. I think that it is very relevant for whatever we decide to do with that second piece of survey work. And I know we can all talk about that. So that's a comment, not a question. So.
Any final questions or thoughts for Jason? I would like to spend, the last, 10, 15 minutes just kind of sharing council thoughts on or perceptions of what we've gleaned out of this information so far. Jason, we thank you for what you've done. This was great work again. And happy to report that you might be getting a call from us at some point shortly here regarding, as Councilor Hamel just pointed out, possible school questionnaire. So.
And I wanted to just say I had, thanks to, we don't spend a lot of time talking about former counselors, but Ken Johnson did a lot of work in this. He really kind of took this on, as sort of one thing he wanted to do as a personal goal and objective. And I think that, he is a statistician by trade and actually does Dodd-Frank compliance as his job, which I can't imagine. But he really drove this thing and got us to this point. So I think we need to thank him for that. I don't know if he's watching tonight, but really great piece of work.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate your time
great.
tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks everyone.
So as far as where we are on the council side, I think now would be kind of if we wanted to quickly share some just insights and thoughts that maybe we've all gleaned from this. I know part of us wanting to have this in hand now is because we did want this in hand before we hit council setting goals. And we'll be doing council setting goals in about 3 weeks by my calendar. So this will be helpful for us to have as we look for, items to tackle in the next year. So I'll just start by saying that the thing that caught my attention was the drop in the perception of the community. And that's why I was asking, the perception thing could be influenced by a lot of different factors. It could be national politics for all we know, and there's just an overall souring on every topic everywhere. And you don't know how that compares unless you see if the slide we're seeing is something that we're seeing across the region or across the US. That's, you get these surveys and you love them because you have plenty of information, but then we're still left to try to interpret some of this and then how to go forward. Our growth management ordinance was just put into place in July 1st, so has it had the time to take place and see if the growth management aspects of our efforts are really taking hold and doing well? 6 months isn't quite enough time to see if it's actually working. So are we seeing responses that really are dealing with the last 3 to 4 years worth of growth? And maybe we've already taken enough steps. Maybe we haven't. And I think that's what's left up for us to decide as a council, whether it needs to go a step further or we need to wait to see if the new policies we put in place work. So that was just a couple things. I'll just throw in kudos to staff and public safety. I mean, incredibly impressive numbers. And I think it's representative, and that's it for what it's worth. I think that's top down. I think if you look at the leadership we have here, it translates down to the staff and the experience that people in this community are having within. So again, kudos to you, your staff, Chief Holmquist, his staff, Chief Kindle, his staff, Public Works, Doug Howard, and his staff. So I think they deserve all the kudos in the world. I don't know, just this is food for thought. I don't expect answers this evening, but as we go through it, I made a note. There's a couple things in here that I feel like kind of conflicted. So there seems to be a desire for, of course, more affordable housing, more workforce housing, but then in the same breath, we have too much housing and bad traffic problems. And then couple that with the second highest concern in town, which is the impact of taxes. Well, let's face it, folks, affordable housing and workforce housing usually require some sort of tax subsidy. So, I mean, we really have conflicting pieces of information to work with there, and that's tough to navigate. So again, food for thought before we go into our goal setting. I think that's it for now. Does anyone else want to jump in? Councilor Cushing.
Thank you. So first of all, the council knows, but the public doesn't know that I sent them all an email today summarizing my thoughts. I'd be happy if you want to put those in the record because I don't want to take up a lot of time here. But I do have a take which I think is maybe speaks to what Councilor McGee was saying, and that and to some extent responds to Councilor Hamill's comments regarding growth. To me, it is really clear. People don't want growth and they want us to fix it. But then, wait a minute. We have a growth ordinance, and the growth ordinance is designed to limit the number of building permits that are issued in the town. We have the Crossroads Project, and I think we ought to start calling it that, which is designed to manage growth by concentrating the density and increasing the tax base. We're buying up 30% of the land in this town, and we're making really good progress. So what that says to me is that in part, I don't know if people know exactly what it is the town is doing or what it is the town is legally capable of. We can't build a wall, okay? And one of the problems that we face, thanks to all of our wonderful town employees, is that this continues to be an extremely desirable place to live. So in part, I think we have some work to do in terms of explaining what is the current status with growth, because right now the major dashboard is Route 1 and how long you're sitting at the traffic light. And so I'm not suggesting that we are or aren't doing a good job, but I can tell you that I've got spreadsheet after spreadsheet after spreadsheet. It gives me information on growth in this town. And if you ask me just on the street, how we doing? I'd say, I don't really have a clue. And the reason I don't have a clue is because I don't have some kind of baseline to judge it against. And so within that environment, it really is not unexpected to have people sort of go with what they see. And that is that, I've lived in this town a few years. It didn't take quite so long to go up Route 1. Sometimes it takes me 5 minutes to get out of my street onto Black Point Road during the traffic. And if that's all I know, plus the limited amount of information I get in the leader, then I don't think the town's doing a very good job with growth. So I'm sorry but the rest of my comments are in that email, Nick, and if you'd like to stick them in the record for, yeah.
So
It went to all of you, so.
I'd like to build on that if I may. I think those are very good statements. I like the way that Councilor Cushing has framed it. He said, these are the things we're doing to control growth. The question is, how are we doing? The answer is, we don't really know, okay? The public is telling us you suck, and we're saying everything's fine, and there's a big gap there, okay? So that's the problem statement. And I think that's where we'll be spending a lot of time together trying to figure that out, but I think it's a problem statement that we haven't solved for yet.
I saw Counselor Scyther before I turned my head this way. You're good? Counselor Anderson.
I mean, I think there's some good and then there's some bad, right? The good is from a town services perspective. Does help out. Again, I think that's where conflict comes in. Sorry, they're very satisfied with the services, but then the question around the perception of value that they receive for their taxes, those are in conflict to me, and I find it interesting because if you're very satisfied with the services you're getting, but you don't see the value based on the price you're paying in your taxes, where would the community like to see us cut certain services, which would likely reduce satisfaction? And I don't think many people, I would be interested to know from the public, like, in order to give you a better perception of value, where are the areas where you would like to see potential reductions to actually, that could come at the cost of services and satisfaction? And that's a tough thing, I think, for people to reconcile, myself included. And I'm not suggesting we cut anything necessarily, but I actually think what it means to me is there's a huge opportunity to communicate better the value for the tax dollars that they're getting and how that is helping with these services. Again, we made investments last year. I think as we go into the budget for 2025, the Finance Committee is going to be talking a little bit about ways to improve process, or even maybe some things we want to ask from staff. But in my mind, just with that, like, what I would like to see is kind of, we made investments in the town last year, talk about what those investments did for the community, highlight the value so that we can communicate that broadly, so that people see the investments we're making in our community are actually important in improving services, and help communicate that better. So I think that's a real communications opportunity. And I think that's the thing too with growth. It's like, yes, I agree, like, with the problem is not solved, but at the same time, there's conflicts and perception in different areas that we have to try and balance. And so how do we optimize that balance, right? Like, if they're concerned about the pace of growth, but they're also concerned about affordability and living here, or affordable housing, growth is part of that equation that actually helps address those particular questions. And so, again, I think that's an opportunity for us to kind of really look at all of these things that intersect and connect, explain our rationale as to why we're making the policy decisions we are that try and optimize all those areas. But if we're, putting too much emphasis on affordability, because growth is really the bigger satisfaction and people are willing to pay a little bit more in taxes and have less growth, I think we need to know that so that we can make better policy decisions. And again, I think the survey is great at giving us the perception, but really what it leaves me with is just more questions, right? Like, more things I want to understand and know. And so I think it'll be exciting for the comms committee and others to kind of dig deeper and figure out how do we want to further engage the public more, to kind of dig into certain areas that we want to explore and better understand.
Yeah, I think what we have to caution against, right? These are perceptions, these are feelings, this is their impressions. They're not wrong. Like, they're giving us their feedback. So how we take that feedback and then turn it into policy, whether it's actually changing ordinance, or maybe it's just better communication of what current policies are. Because sometimes clarifying what people are misunderstanding will change their perception. So I think that's for us to figure out, where is it we need to wade into changing ordinances or tweaking impact fees or whatever it might be, versus do we need to do a better job of, getting educational information out there. And I think that's all for us to decide as we go forward. So, I wasn't hoping that they would hand us a silver bullet, and it never is that. But there's plenty to learn from this. So anyone else want to